At the moment, though, there's something that is top of all of our minds, and that's inflation. And the inflation numbers, which get posted, and Regent Makarishan, you've been saying this consistently, that the numbers are posted less housing and less energy. Well, guess what? And I think you've been right on when you've said energy prices are going through the roof and housing prices are going through the roof. Well, I don't think inflation is transitory at this point. And that's been our posture in the last couple of meetings with, expert advice that inflation is transitory. I think inflation is here to stay longer. And what I'd like to do is ask Dave. Dave's seen this for 40 years. He's been trading for 40 years and actually buying inflation for 40 years through tips. Give me your backdrop, or how do you see where we are with inflation today? And what does it look like for you? And also generally, how does all of this manifest in our fixed income portfolio and how we're positioned today and into the future?
I might add, if I may, that I said food, energy as well. I mean, you forgot about food, not just housing and energy.
Absolutely, you're right. Sorry, I meant to say food. Actually, I meant to say food and energy, not housing and energy. But thank you for
Thank you.
Yeah.
So.
And sorry, by the way, Regent Makarishan, the current crisis, not just energy, but when you think of what's going on with global food supply and commodities around food, I mean, those two things have amplified at a significant level, even without COVID. So anyways, back to you, Dave.
I have to disclose that I have no investments in those two companies.
So neither do we. We don't have anything in Russia at this point because it all went away in the last 2 weeks. So, Dave.
Thanks, Jagdeep. So Hadi's correct. I mean, we are seeing a burst of inflation that is unlike anything we've seen for the past 40 years. We've been blessed up until the pandemic with a very stable price regime where inflation's averaged about 2% for the prior 30 years. But back in the early 80s, CPI peaked at 14%. And I don't want to age myself, but I was a 25-year-old money market trader in 1980. And I can recall that I had an even numbered license plate on my VW Bug and stressing about being in the gas line on the even numbered day to fill up to get my allotted amount of fuel. So this is another burst of inflation that's somewhat akin to what we experienced in the early 80s, but it's a bit different as that one was, an energy crunch, if I recall. What we're seeing now is really a broad base. So, the current numbers reflect that. CPI printed for February with a year-over-year increase of 7.9%. Within CPI, energy prices rose over 25% year over year. Food prices rose about 8%. Now, the core, which excludes food and energy, rose about 6.5%. Service inflation within core was just above 4%. Goods prices rose over 12%. And that's a key difference from what we've seen lately. Goods inflation has been roughly zero, for the prior 3 decades in front of the pandemic. And what really changed was obviously supply chains broke because with globalization, our manufacturing center is largely based in Asia now. And we've all seen the ship count out in the LA harbor, and I rode my bike by it on a bike ride last fall. So a broken supply chain, a change in consumer behavior where, folks returned to home and demanded more goods, household furnishings, cars, apparel. Those prices all increased relatively dramatically over the past 12 months. Used car prices are up 41% in the CPI year on year. Household furnishings up 10, apparel up 6. So an increase in prices, unlike something we've seen, and it's really been quite broad-based. Now, that brings up a question is what will be the policy response? The Fed is concluding a 2-day policy meeting tomorrow, and they're expected to announce the first of a series of rate increases, which we believe that they estimate will end up with an overnight policy rate, a Fed funds rate of around 2.75% when this is all said and done over the period of a couple of years. We also expect them to begin to establish a framework for quantitative tightening where they begin to reduce the amount of assets they hold on their balance sheet, which currently stands in the neighborhood of 9 trillion. So the Fed will begin removing accommodation, and you know, Larry Summers appears to be correct. They are behind the curve. And inflation has been much more persistent